Hey class, this is our Cornell Notes lecture for section 2.2 and 2.3. Just some video lecture reminders. Since this is a video, please feel free to take advantage of all of the things you can do with a video, like pausing and rewinding if you don't understand something, playing it back, coming back to this lecture even after you're done with the assignment, and also go ahead and give me some feedback. I would love to find out ways of how I can make this video better. My learning objectives for you for this lecture is to learn about medieval Europe during the medieval times and to learn how to take Cornell Notes on your own. I'm not exactly going to cut you guys loose and let you guys do everything on your own. I'm going to structure it and I'm going to kind of show you my thought process as I'm taking notes. Some Cornell Note reminders. It's okay, you can use incomplete sentences. Feel free to use symbols whenever it's appropriate. I love to use @ symbols and arrows and draw lines and equal signs, so I'm totally fine with that. That also helps shorten your notes. It helps you do less writing, which is kind of the point here. Pay attention to headings and subheadings. You usually want to write those in your notes. And pay attention to topic sentences and concluding sentences. You might be writing a note from the topic sentence or concluding sentence in your Cornell Notes. Okay, your worksheet looks like this. It's double-sided, so make sure you flip it over. I have already filled out the topic and essential question for you. Our topic is 2.2, Western Europe during the Middle Ages, and 2.3, feudalism, establishing order. The essential question is, what types of things happen when a land is not unified and is unorganized? As you are listening to this lecture, fill in the blanks on your paper with the bolded and underlined text in the upcoming slides. So your text you should be filling in the blanks when the text looks like this. Okay, you should have your book open to page 20. This is what the page looks like. The first thing I want you guys to take a look at is the heading, 2.2, Western Europe during the Middle Ages. It's important to kind of get an idea of what you're about to read. Not only do we have headings, we have subheadings. There's one right there, Charlemagne's Empire. We have vocabulary words. Vocabulary is found within the text and also on the sides, so you want to read both when you come across them. And then people always forget about this, but don't forget to read the captions. There's a lot of good information in the captions. Okay, this first part is going to be like a little introduction between the heading and the subheading. Whatever information I don't know, I just kind of jot down. It's usually a recall of what you just read, and it kind of leads you into what you are about to read. So I already wrote the heading for you on your notes, 2.2, Western Europe during the Middle Ages. Let's start reading. For 500 years, much of Europe was part of the Roman Empire. The rest of the continent was controlled by groups of people that the Romans called barbarians. When Rome fell into invading barbarians in 476 CE, Europe was left with no central government or system of defense. Many invading groups set up kingdoms throughout Western Europe. These kingdoms were often at war with one another. The most powerful rulers were those who controlled the most land and had the best warriors. So if we stop there, we want to think about what is important to write down. Dates, for me, aren't super important, but I do think you should write them down because they give you a general, time period. I wouldn't worry about memorizing dates. We live in a time where you can just Google it. So jot it down. Don't worry about memorizing it. It'll help you a little bit later. So 476, Europe was left with no central government. How should we write this? Let's start with 476, and I'm going to draw an arrow. And since these are notes, don't feel like you have to write in a complete sentence, so just write no central government. Next, I noticed the vocab word barbarians, and this isn't a vocab word we went over in class, so I think that's pretty important, so I'm going to jot it down. Barbarians, I'm going to have to look at the vocab in the side margin because it doesn't give me the definition within the text. So if I look at the definition in the side margin, it says barbarian, a person belonging to a tribe or group that is considered uncivilized. So on my notes, I'm going to write barbarians, put a colon, and just put uncivilized people. I don't need to write the entire thing. I think just writing uncivilized people gives me the gist. Okay, back to the reading. What else can I write down? I know Europe had no central government. Barbarians were uncivilized people. What was happening at the time? Kingdoms were often at war. So I'm going to write that. Kingdoms, often, and then I'm going to use the at symbol, and I'll put in war. I could just do kingdoms at war, either or. And the last sentence is something I didn't know, so I do want to jot that down. It says the most powerful rulers were those who controlled the most land and had the best warriors. So I'm going to write powerful rulers controlled land plus best warriors. All right, let's keep going. I have a subtitle or subheading here. It says Charlemagne's Empire. Subheadings are typically important, so let's jot that down. I've already written it for you, and we will start reading. One powerful group during this time was the Franks, from whom modern-day France takes its name. The Franks were successful because they had developed a new style of warfare. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I know we're going to be talking about the Franks. Remember, I told you the topic sentence is usually pretty important. So let's write down the Franks. And why were they important? Developed a new style of warfare. Okay, so I'm going to write a new style of warfare. And let's find out what that was. The Franks were successful because they had developed a new style of warfare. It depended on troops of knights, heavily armed warriors who fought on horseback. To get and hold power, a ruler needed the services and loyalty of many knights. In return for their loyalty and service, the ruler rewarded knights with land and privileges. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my notes. New style of warfare, I'll put colon, knights fighting on horseback. Let's keep reading. One of the early leaders of the Franks was an ambitious young warrior named Clovis. Okay, I'm going back to my notes now. They've introduced somebody new. Is also in the topic sentence, like I said. So let's write in his name, Clovis. In 481 CE, at the age of 15, Clovis became king of the Franks. So I'm going to add the year next to his name, 481. And underneath his name, I'll start with some bullet points that will describe Clovis. 5 years later, he defeated the last Roman army in Gaul. During his 30-year reign, he led the Franks in wars that widened the boundaries of the Frankish kingdom. Clovis also helped lead the Franks into Christianity. Clovis married a Christian woman, Clotilda, and eventually was baptized into the Roman Catholic Church. Many of his followers became Christians as well. Okay, back to our notes. Clovis, what do we know about him? It says at the age of 15 he became king of the Franks and he defeated the last great Roman army. So I'm just going to write he was a great young warrior. In the last sentence of that paragraph, it talks about how he widened the boundaries of the kingdom. So, and I think that's pretty important for a leader, a pretty good accomplishment. So let's add that in. Widen the boundaries of the kingdom. And more information, the topic sentence of the following paragraph, it says Clovis also helped lead the Franks into Christianity. And I know that religion was a really important part of the Middle Ages. So I'm going to write led the Franks into Christianity. Okay, remember, if I'm going too fast for you, this is a video. Go ahead and press pause, rewind. I want to make sure you guys are not only getting the information down, but really understanding that taking notes is a process. You have to think about what you're writing and what's important and what's not. Okay, next paragraph. The most popular leader of the Franks was Charlemagne, Charles the Great. Okay, I've got a new leader, so I'm going to add him to my notes. Charlemagne - Charles the Great. Next sentence. This impressive king ruled for over 40 years, from 768 to 814. I've got some dates. I want to jot those dates down. Again, it gives me kind of a time frame in my mind. So 768 to 814. Back to reading. Writings from that period say that he was 6 feet 4 inches tall, extremely tall for his time, and, quote, always stately and dignified. Legend has it that he read very little and couldn't write, yet he loved to have scholarly works read to him. He encouraged education and scholarship, making his court a center of culture. Most important, he unified nearly all the Christian lands of Europe into a single empire. One of the poets at his court called him King Father of Europe. Okay, a lot of information about Charles the Great. What's important here? I don't know if this is important, but I think it'll help me remember him. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, so I'm going to write that. How you write that without actually having to write out all the words. 6, and then an apostrophe. That apostrophe stands for feet. And then 4, and then 2 apostrophes or a quote. That stands for inches. So 6 feet 4 inches tall. I think I want to write in a quote. I think quotes are important because they are primary sources and I can always come back to them and cite them as evidence. So I'll write in always stately and dignified. He encouraged education and scholarship. I think that's important to note because he is responsible for educating some of his people. His court was the center of culture, so I'm going to write court equals center of culture. I think that's important because not only did he promote education, he promoted culture, and new kingdoms at this time were developing their own cultures. So let's write that. And then at the bottom it says most important, so I think I should write that. He unified nearly all Christian lands of Europe into a single empire. There's another quote. Let's go ahead. We can throw that in there. You don't have to write this if you want. I think I already wrote it for you. But he was the King Father of Europe. Let's keep reading. Last 2 sentences of page 20. Charlemagne built his empire with the help of a pope, Leo III, the leader of the Catholic Church in Rome. As you will learn in next chapter, the church was a central part of society during this time. I'm not going to write down the definition for pope because I know I already have that in my vocabulary notes, so I'll keep reading. For Charlemagne, the blessing of the church sent the message, God is on my side. For his part, Leo needed the support of someone with an army. In return for Charlemagne's help, the Pope crowned him Holy Roman Emperor in 800 CE. I think that is definitely important. He is officially the emperor, so I'm going to write that down. So let's start with 800 CE, crowned Holy Roman Empire by Pope Leo III. Next paragraph. Charlemagne's empire survived many barbarian attacks. After his death in 1814, however, it quickly fell apart. The weak rulers who followed him could not defend the empire against new waves of invasions. Still, these kings helped prepare the way for feudalism by following Charlemagne's example of rewarding knights with land and privileges in return for military service. I know that's important. The title of this chapter is Feudalism, so I'm going to add that. Helped prepare the way for feudalism. I have the definition of feudalism in my notes, so I'm not going to rewrite it here. Let's move on to the next subheading, a need for order and protection. We've got that written down. Let's start reading. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Western Europe was threatened by 3 main groups. Muslims, or followers of the religion Islam, advanced from the Near East and North Africa into what is now Spain. Magyars, a Central Asian people, pressed from the east, and Vikings swept down from present-day Norway and Denmark. So I know this next section tells me that Europe was threatened by some groups, so let's write that down. Western Europe threatened by Muslims, Magyars, and Vikings. I don't have to add that extra information about who the Muslims were, mainly because I could look it up a little bit later. The important part is that Western Europe was threatened. Next paragraph. The Vikings were fierce warriors who struck fear into the people of Europe. At times, their intent was to set up colonies. but they were best known for their terrifying raids on towns and villages. Imagine a Viking attack. The people of the village are at early morning church services when an alarm bell starts to peal. Vikings! Long, shallow wooden boats have brought the Vikings close to shore. Now they leave their boats and run toward the town with swords and axes raised over their heads. People running in all directions. Several villagers who try to resist are killed. Others are seized by the Viking raiders and taken back to the ships. Okay, Vikings. We should probably write something about them. So, Vikings, present day Norway and Denmark. That's where they're from. What do I know about them? They are fierce warriors. They did terrifying raids on towns and villages. And the last paragraph, clearly the people of Western Europe needed ways to defend themselves, to protect themselves and their property. They gradually developed the system we call feudalism. Let's find out how it worked. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to write for protection, and I'll draw an arrow, feudalism. If you take a look at the picture on your notes, it's the same picture in the book. The caption in the book says, a fleet of Viking ships attacked the walled city of Paris in 885 CE. That visual will just kind of give you a little idea of why they needed so much protection. Okay, next section. This is page 22. It's section 2.3, Feudalism, Establishing Order. This is just a short section, so let's get started. By the High Middle Ages, about 1000 CE, Europeans had developed the system of feudalism. The feudal system provided people with protection and safety by establishing a stable social order. Under this system, people were bound to one another by promises of loyalty. In theory, all the land in the kingdom belonged to the monarch, usually a king, but sometimes a queen. A great deal of land was also owned by the church. The king kept some of his land for himself and gave fiefs or grants of land to his most important lords, who became his vassals. In return, each lord promised to supply the king with knights in times of war. A lord then enlisted lesser lords and knights as his vassals. Often these arrangements were written down. Many of these contracts survive to this day in museums. Okay, let's go back. I see a date, so I'm going to include that. About 1000 CE, the feudal system is developed. So I'll write in about, that little kind of wavy thing. It stands for about. It's a symbol for about, so you can go ahead and use that whenever you want. About 1000 CE, feudal system. What else do I know? The feudal system was protection and safety, and they exchanged that for social order bound by promises of loyalty. I know that the monarch had land and traded that land for knights that he or she got from lords. Let's keep reading. At the bottom of the social system were peasants. Lords rented some of their land to peasants who worked for them. Some peasants, called serfs, were tied to the land they worked. They could not leave the lord's land, and they had to farm his fields in exchange for a small plot of land of their own. Most lords and wealthier knights lived on manors, or large estates. A manor included a castle or manor house, one or more villages, and the surrounding farmland. Manors were in the country, far from towns. That meant peasants had to produce everything the people in the manor needed. Only a few goods came from outside the manor, such as salt for preserving meat and iron for making tools. During the Middle Ages, people were born into a social class for life. They had the same social position and often the same job as their parents. Let's take a closer look at all the classes in feudal society. We will be reading that section a little bit later. Let's go back to our notes. We wrote previously that monarchs traded land for knights from lords. We know now that lords traded land for work from peasants. A serf was a peasant who was tied to the land. And also written in this section is information about manors, and I know that manors were large estates. Other than that, I think you guys are pretty familiar with everything else in the text, and if not, it's something that you could remember after maybe reading once. It's not something that you necessarily have to jot down. Remember, Cornell Notes, you're writing main ideas and themes, and you're using them to refer back to things that you wouldn't just normally remember after a lecture or a class discussion. I do have a section for you here in your Cornell Notes. You can write any other notes that you wanted to include, or you can jot down some questions that you have for me or just about medieval times for yourself. And finally, you will have to go back and write in your questions. Main thing about Cornell Notes are the questions in the margins, questions and main ideas. I would say for the first page, you should have about 3 questions, and the second page, probably like 2. On the first page, remember, you are asking questions in the margin that relate to the notes that you took. So the answer to the question should be found in the notes. At the very end, you are going to write your summary. And a great trick for the summary is to simply answer your questions. So if your first question was something like, what was Europe like after Rome fell? You could write, after Rome fell, there was no central government and kingdoms were at war. So powerful rulers like Charlemagne and Clovis emerged. And you would keep going from there. Hint, hint, I gave you your first question and your first sentence of your summary. You're welcome. One more thing. If you missed anything in this lecture, please feel free to rewind, come back to it. When you are done with this, please make sure you get your table of contents stamped and you keep all your work in your social studies folder. I really hope these notes gave you a better understanding of Europe during the Middle Ages and feudalism. And even more importantly, I hope you're grasping the concept of Cornell Notes and understanding how to pull out important information, and you are just generally getting a little bit more comfortable with it. All right, bye.